Come on in, find a seat. We're going to get started. Isn't it great to see all these faces in person, actually find out how tall people are? I was just saying, my suit still fits 3 years later. It's the highlight of my week. My name is Jeff Allen. I'm Executive Director of Fourth. I'm here to welcome you to Roadmap 2022. We have a whole lot of exciting content to get to, as well as, of course, a ton of networking opportunities and engagement. And we're going to get right into it in just a minute, but I do have some housekeeping items and other announcements I have to share with you and thank yous. So first of all, most importantly, if you haven't already caught on, the Wi-Fi network is Roadmap Conference, and the password is Roadmap22, capital R. So now that we're all even more addicted to our screens than we were 3 years ago, now you can share everything you're learning out to your social network. You can post, pictures of your drink to Instagram, whatever it is you need to do. I want to start by thanking our generous sponsors for their support. We absolutely could not do this event without them. Starting with, I don't know, how many of you were able to attend that reception last night? With the welcome reception. So many thanks to Stoll Reeves for sponsoring that reception, and to Tim McMahon, who's also a board member of Fourth. Tim, are you in the room? All right, find him, thank him. If you had a good time at the reception last night. I also want to thank and introduce some of the Fourth team. Could I ask the leadership team to come up on the stage while I'm talking here? We're talking about the fact that you all are, especially those of you who've been coming to this event for a few years, you must be getting sick of looking at me up here all the time. So I want to introduce the Fourth leadership team who make all this magic possible. And I'm going to share some of the MC duties. Uh-oh, are we missing Gina? All right, you'll get to meet Gina later. But Kat, Jeanette, Stefani, and Gina, who you'll meet later. Can we give them a round? All right, so you guys can introduce yourselves more, but you'll be seeing more of them over the next 2 days. And this team of four are the ones who really make everything work at Fourth. I also want to give a shout out to the Fourth staff and board members. Can you all stand up? So find these folks in the course of the conference and ask them if you want to know more about Fourth and what we're up to. We actually have a booth out here as well that you can stop by and learn more. But we have 36 people on staff now, and they're the ones who really make all this magic happen. Ashley, would you stand back up for a minute, please? In particular, if you see this young lady over here, Ashley Duplanty has been running this conference for a half dozen years. And if you have a good time at this conference, if you learn something new at this conference, if you meet someone new at this conference, Ashley's the one to thank. So make sure you do that when you see her. And if the conference runs on time, the other folks I want to acknowledge are our conference management team at Social Enterprises. Could the Social Enterprises folks? They're probably over at the table here. Is Erica still in the room? Is Erica Dickey-Nielsen still in the room somewhere? Where is she hiding? So they've been putting on this conference for us for almost 10 years. So if things are running on time and they're running well and the AV system works and all that, that's who you have to thank for that. Speaking of AV and Wi-Fi and the rest of it, if you haven't already, we encourage you to download the conference app. You download software called Whova, W-H-O-V-A, and then you just go into Find My Event and search for Roadmap. And it'll prompt you to enter the password, which is Roadmap22. It's a few steps, I get that, but it's worth it. There's all sorts of things you can do on that app, including see who else is in the room and ping people you might want to meet with. As I mentioned, if you're active on social media, we encourage you to post what you're learning. Put things on Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever the cool kids are using these days. Our hashtag is Roadmap4th. And our tag is @4thMobility. A few special things in the program I wanted to call out and make sure that you don't miss. It's all great. Of course, it's all great. But in particular, this afternoon, we're going to have a keynote address from Reverend Lennox Yearwood, President and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus. Then we're going to be presenting our Roadmap Awards. And of course, we're going to have another reception. Tonight, the reception will be next door in the expo hall, so it'll give you a chance to check out the exhibits if you haven't already done that. Also want to mention there's a ride and drive happening later outside from 10:15 to 5:30, and I believe the Oregon-made Arcimoto is on test drive out there, which is a totally unique experience you won't want to miss. Bright and early tomorrow, 7:30 to 8:30, the U.S. Department of Energy is going to be hosting an optional listening session on vehicle grid integration in meeting room E141, 142. So if you want to talk about why and how it's so important to scale up vehicle grid integration, get up a little bit early and come join us there. Also tomorrow morning, we're going to have another plenary up here on the stage talking about the false debate between electric vehicles and compact cities. That's one you won't want to miss. Finally, just want to mention COVID is still with us. We have a couple of speakers and moderators who have been unable to join because of COVID. So encourage you all, if you can, if you are comfortable wearing masks, especially if you're just sitting in a session, please encourage you to do that. We have some at reception if you would like to, and we hope everybody stays healthy. Couple more things before we hand it over to the panel. You'll notice, if you were with us yesterday or in the course of the day, that Fourth really centers equity in our work. And that starts by recognizing how transportation policy in the past and in the present is reinforcing those patterns of inequality and exclusion. You know, and many of us in Oregon here grew up learning about the Oregon Trail, or a particular version of the Oregon Trail. We didn't learn the version about how transportation systems were built to bring white settlers out to occupy stolen land, but that's what we were doing. So with that in mind, I want to acknowledge that the lands where Fourth is based and where we are here today, what we now call Portland, Multnomah County, were traditional lands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Cowlitz bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes here along the Columbia River. And today, people from those bands have become part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, as well as the Chinook Nation and Cowlitz Nation up in Washington State. Now, we've probably all heard a lot of land acknowledgments by now, and all too often that's becoming just sort of formulaic. So I'm really thrilled that Fourth has begun growing some partnerships with Native organizations here in the region that we work with on electric mobility projects, and that we're going to have a panel on electric mobility on tribal lands during the conference. So I'd encourage folks to check that out. I think in addition to recognizing that Native history, it's also important to recognize that this convention center, this great facility where we meet, was actually built as part of a long-term urban renewal effort that destroyed much of the historic cultural hub of Portland's African-American community, the Albina neighborhood. And there's a really exciting effort underway now to try and restore pieces of that neighborhood. And if you're interested in learning more about that history and about what's happening right now, I'd encourage you to go to albinavision.org, and you can learn about some of those efforts that are underway. So with all of that, without further ado, I want to get the program rolling by introducing our first sponsor. And we'll welcome Chris Thorson, Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of Flow, to introduce some remarks from Secretary Granholm.
Good morning and welcome everyone. It is great to be back and to see people live and meet people live. I'm Chris Thorson, Chief Marketing Officer at Flow. We are a manufacturer and network operator of one of the largest EV networks here in North America, with over about 60,000 chargers deployed and in service today. Some of our key deployments have been in New York City with Con Edison, as well as in the city of Los Angeles. And our claim to fame is really focused on uptime, reliability, ensuring that we can provide over 98% uptime and reliability for our customers. So if you want to talk more about EV charging, certainly come check us out. We'll be right over here in the show floor in the booth. We've got chargers from residential all the way up to DCFC. So this session here, you're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about and learn what's going on in our industry and focusing on how we're really making that transition, the interaction between government as well as our own private industry here. So with that, we've got some opening remarks from Energy Secretary Granholm, and I think we're going to go ahead and roll that video to begin. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks to Forth for bringing us all together, and welcome really to the most exciting time for electric vehicles in history. Obviously, you all know EV sales doubled in this administration's first year, and they could double again this year. And right now, EVs are 6% of the U.S. market, but President Biden wants to see that EV share of the market hit 50% by the end of this decade. So our strategy to get there revolves around really one simple idea, which is that we ought to be staying just ahead of the market. So if you're looking for a new car, our administration wants to make it as easy as possible for people to choose electric. And because, of course, EVs slash carbon pollution from the transportation sector, and of course, it slashes cost for American families. Many new EVs already save you money from the day you drive them out of the dealership. Since most people finance their vehicles, that's especially true. And then, of course, EVs are also cheaper to maintain, and EV owners save big bucks by avoiding gas prices every time they plug that car in. So we envision a future where every American who wants a car can afford an EV and then enjoy the cost savings. We want to see a future where they can get wherever they want to go in an EV. So here's what it's going to take. First, we need to build out a national network of EV charging stations, and we need to get them integrated into the grid so that people can charge up where they live, work, and play. So there's $5 billion for that in President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, and state plans to get a slice of that money are due on August 1st. So let me say this to the states working on those plans: be ambitious. Maximize your impact on climate, on jobs, on justice. Use these resources from our Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. They have met with every state to develop the best plan possible, and they've got additional office hours and a new FAQ on their website, which is driveelectric.gov. And then please take the time to respond to the Department of Transportation's proposed standards for EV charging stations so we can get this right from the beginning. Beyond that $5 billion bucket, though, there's another $2.5 billion more in the bipartisan infrastructure law to really expand charging access. So we're going to be working with local leaders to figure out how we can use that money in ways that best suits their communities. That could mean expanding home charging for multifamily buildings. It could mean expanding access to transit and ride-sharing vehicles and lowering transportation pollution. It could be creating jobs in EVs and batteries. We're all ears for all ideas. Then, the next part of our strategy is really making more EVs and batteries right here in America. DOE is investing $7 billion through that bipartisan infrastructure law to boost battery manufacturing and really create jobs up and down the supply chain. So we applaud Ford and GM and others in the private sector that have made big investments in domestic EV and battery manufacturing, but we need to see even more, and we're very happy to help automakers get what they need to expand operations in America. And then third, we need all of those American-made EVs to be even more affordable. So our Vehicle Technologies Office has been investing in cutting-edge battery technology for decades to make them more efficient, make them recyclable, and there are plenty of opportunities to partner with them. Add in the president's proposed federal tax credits, and we can make EVs accessible to millions more Americans. And then fourth and finally, we have to make sure that we're charging up our EVs with 100% clean power, and we have to electrify as much of the transportation sector as we can. So we're talking buses, we're talking heavy-duty trucks, we're even talking shipping. That bipartisan infrastructure law is helping us lay the foundation for a 100% clean energy economy. It's got investments in clean hydrogen hubs, advanced nuclear, geothermal, and more. And if Congress enacts more federal tax credits for all kinds of clean technologies, we'll have the tools to build on that foundation. So the administration is doing everything we can to drive all 4 of those priorities forward, but we need your help. We need you, whether you're a state agency, transportation agency, maybe you're a car company, maybe you're an advocate. We need input on how we can more effectively accomplish those goals. So please don't hesitate to engage with us. And we need the vision of leaders in this field. We need them to help guide our efforts to speed development and adoption and integration of EVs. So if that's you, submit your interest in our new EV working group. So thank you for all the work that you've done to get us to this moment. And thank you for all you'll continue to do to keep building this all-electric future that we know is out there. Let's get this done.
You know, we don't often do recorded remarks, but I think you'll agree with me that the secretary recorded is better than most of us in person. So thank you so much for that. Up next, we are going to get to dig in more live and in person with some of the folks that she mentioned that are doing this work. And to introduce that panel, we have Simon Lonsdale, Head of Sales and Strategy from Amply Power. Come on up.
Thank you, Jeff. And of course, thank you, Secretary Granholm. There's no one really better suited to the task of orchestrating this transition to electric vehicles than Secretary Granholm, former governor of Michigan, the birthplace of the US auto industry. So on behalf of Amply Power, I'd like to welcome you to Fourth Roadmap and to this plenary session on leading the charge from DC. A quick introduction to Amply Power. We are around really just to simplify electric fleet charging. Amply provides complete EV charging and energy management solutions for fleet operators of, as Secretary Granholm said, trucks, buses, vans, and cars, really helping to lead our customers into production scale for both public and private fleets. We're actively engaged with Washington, D.C., and that's why we care about this panel and this session, both in the transformation of the federal's own fleets to electric, but also with some of the new proposals from Bill that you'll hear about today, including NEVI introducing high uptime standards for electric vehicle charging on funded stations. I think something that all of us who have been around this for a long time would agree with. Without further ado, I'd like to make a quick introduction to the moderator and the panelists today, and hopefully you'll agree. I think we've been really lucky as a Fourth Roadmap to get the trifecta together today for this session. First of all, Dr. Nancy Ryan, whose expertise combines high-level government, corporate, and nonprofit experience in creating innovative public policies and regulations, as her role at eMobility Advisors. Prior to this, Nancy served as the lead commissioner for the California Public Utilities Commission, leading some of the first in the nation transportation electrification policies, and including some of the cap and trade and the LCFS programs. Prior to that, Nancy was also part of E3, Energy and Environmental Economics, founding that consultancy's transportation electrification practice. First panelist I'd like to introduce is Alex Schroeder. Alex is the interim executive at the Joint Office of Energy and Transformation. I'm sure you'll hear a lot about that this morning. Alex leads this newly formed Joint Office of Energy and Transformation, which was established to align the resources and the expertise across the US Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy. And Alex comes to this role from his previous experience many years at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, where he's led a research group that focuses on vehicle charging, grid integration, and the decarbonization of commercial vehicles. The next panelist I'd like to introduce is Michael Berube. He is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Sustainable Transportation with the U.S. Department of Energy. And Michael has overseen, including vehicle transportation initiatives, both vehicle, bioenergy, and hydrogen offerings. So bringing a wide scope of renewable energy to this conversation today. The final panelist that I'd like to introduce is Andrew Wishnia, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Climate Policy for the U.S. Department of Transportation. And really, I'd just like to personally reach out and recognize Andrew, as well as all of the other people involved. But Andrew was one of the key staffers in developing NEVI, the National EV Infrastructure Program, as a part of his role in transportation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panelists. Thank you for the honor of letting me do this. Nancy, Alex, Michael, and Andrew.
Well, thank you, Simon, for that introduction, and many thanks to Jeff Allen and the team at Forth for bringing us all back together in person and giving me the opportunity to moderate this panel. Just to reiterate, I am so thrilled to be back at Roadmap in person, in the room with all of you, and on the stage with Alex, Michael, and Andrew. So it is really exciting to have this dynamic trio here together to offer their visions and insights on how we can all work together to make the most of this once-in-a-generation opportunity that the EV funding and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So my goal is not to talk too much, but to quickly get them talking. And so just to set things up, I want to point out that Secretary Granholm talked about what a historic moment this is, and one of the many ways in which that's the case is that we have two historically distinct industries converging. If you think about it, the automotive and the electric power industries were born in the late 19th century. They grew to vast scale during the course of the 20th century, and now in the 21st century, they're converging. In the last century, they really, as I said, they were really distinct. Automakers bought electricity from utilities to power factories and light offices. Utilities bought cars and trucks from automakers and truck manufacturers to support their operations. But now they're really coming together. And this has enormous implications, which I think will be the focus of a number of panels and presentations at this conference. We heard about the DOE VGI breakfast tomorrow morning, or breakfast time convening. And I think another thing that's important to understand is that, and is really embodied by this panel, is that as these industries come together, their regulators and the state and federal agencies that support them are also being drawn together. And our three panelists are really in the forefront of that convergence. So Alex, Michael, Andrew, this is one of your first major events together, and I'd like each of you to take a few moments to share your perspective on how you envision your department or office will work on its own and in concert with the others to support attainment of the Biden administration's transportation electrification goals. So what's your role in implementing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act? What have you been up to so far? What are the next steps? How will you work together? What's your vision for how the whole EV ecosystem, cars, trucks, charging, batteries, and grid will unfold? So that's a lot, and take a few minutes each of you, and we'll go down the line here. So Michael, why don't you lead us off?
Well, thank you. And you're right, this is like one of the first events coming out. So I just want to start by recognizing how great it is to be here with all of you. I mean, I look around the room, and over the last half day that I've been here, it's like been dozens of conversations. The people in this room, those who have been coming to this conference for a while in particular, are the ones who are helping to make this change, this revolution happen. So I great boss for the Secretary Granholm, and I think her words are, and she inspires us, are dead on. Like, now is the time. Now is the time to make this happen. So Nancy, on the infrastructure bill, I'll say, so from DOE's perspective, and the first and foremost, it is working in partnership, which you'll hear constantly from our conversation, across the Department of Transportation, EPA, and DOE collectively, and through the joint office, which Alex can talk about. Let me just touch on a little bit of some DOE-specific things. So we're here talking a lot about electrification, right, and a lot about charging, but there are huge efforts going on batteries. There's $6 billion in the infrastructure bill that we are pushing out to develop a domestic supply chain for batteries, for the things that go into the batteries. And that is going to be so critical. So that's one of the big efforts in there. And when we think about transportation decarbonization overall, work for heavy-duty trucks on hydrogen is another big piece in the infrastructure bill. There's $9.5 billion over the next 5 years. We will be building out major hydrogen hubs, big demonstrations and activities to drive the cost of hydrogen down, really focused in the transportation space and the heavy-duty trucks. But hydrogen is going to be really important for the grid overall. So one other piece I do want to touch on is the goal to get to 100% clean electricity. As this group focusing a lot on the transportation side, I think you all know, it's only good if we get those electrons from clean sources. So we are dead serious on that goal of achieving 100% clean electricity by 2035. It's not kind of a fluffy, campaign promise. It is our day-to-day marching orders. We are doing a lot of work on the transmission side, on the generation side, on solar, on wind, to make that happen. And there's a lot of interaction across all of these technologies to get there. So with that, I'll hand it back on down the line here. Alex?
Thank you, Michael. And I would echo everything that you said. It's certainly great to be here in person with all of you and really catch up on some of the exciting opportunities we have, and also want to acknowledge and thank Nancy for her work and leadership. It's hard to believe the National EV Charging Summit was 6 months ago, at least for me, right? It seems like both a lifetime and a week ago. And I think that really speaks to the speed and scale that we're trying to move and the opportunity that's in front of us. So maybe to talk a little bit about the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, we are, as it sounds, a Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, really intended to align and coordinate a number of the efforts that are happening across DOE and DOT for leveraged impact. I think Secretary Granholm did a great job of laying out what's in front of us right now through the NEVI program, where we are actively working with 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico as they develop their state plans, which will be turned into the Joint Office August 1st. This is a foundational investment in our national EV charging infrastructure, and I think for all of us that have been attending this conference for a number of years, really a tipping point and a tremendous opportunity for us to really invest in and build the future that I think we've a lot of times talked about in side meetings and in some of these panels. So the Joint Office was established in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So November 15th, day zero, we were off and running. We're certainly moving with a sense of urgency. I think everyone in the office shares passion for what we're working towards, and that's certainly what propels us forward. Within 30 days of the bill, we actually had both of the secretaries at what was previously a gas station in Maryland, now been fully converted to an EV charging station, signing an MOU to get the Joint Office up and running and off the ground, and we haven't looked back. The Joint Office really has 9 areas in the legislation that we are responsible for, and as you can probably imagine, we've got kind of the twin task of standing up a new office where there isn't really a precedent in government, but delivering on our work, again, on day zero. And so we've had to prioritize our efforts. Certainly NEVI has been a big part of that with again, really the generational investment here. But we're also working very closely with colleagues in DOT and specifically the Federal Transit Administration to support the Low-No Transit Program, as well as colleagues in EPA and the Clean School Bus Program. I think 2 topics that are on the agenda in this conference. So I think to really underscore what Michael is saying about this whole of government approach, it's happening. And it's happening on a daily basis, and we are actively talking to each other. And I think the Joint Office is really intended to be kind of the middle of the Venn diagram so that we are coordinated as we engage with all of you and really presenting a united front and fully leveraging this opportunity. So I think with that, I will pass it over to Andrew.
Thank you so much to Nancy. Thank you so much to Forth. Thank you so much to Michael and Alex. Before I begin, I just want to, let folks know how important Alex's leadership has been at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. He certainly deserves a round of applause just for his remarkable leadership. Alex has been at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, which has never been done before within the federal government, at an extraordinary time for our country and for the electric vehicle revolution that, as Michael mentioned, you all are responsible for. So my heartfelt thanks to Alex and the leadership team at the Joint Office for everything that they've done in their shop. At the Department of Transportation, we're responsible for roughly half of the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in November and signed into law by the president. So that's about $600 billion. Out of that $600 billion, we're here today to talk about $7.5 billion for purposes of this particular question. And the good news is the electric vehicle revolution is here. Year after year after year, we've met with dozens, hundreds, thousands of folks, not only here, but across the country, to figure out how we create a tent big enough to get EV infrastructure sort of over the finish line and enacted by Congress. And now we have that opportunity. So the question is not if we're going to have, EV charging infrastructure strategically sited around the country, but how? And we need to make sure that three things happen. We need to make sure that the electric vehicle charging infrastructure and those electric vehicles are affordable, that they're made in America, and then they happen quick enough so that we can reduce our emissions as quickly as possible. The good news is with the $7.5 billion, $5 billion already provided to states, we're very close to making that a reality. We're going to talk a little bit more, today and in sessions going forward about how that $5 billion is eventually going to get deployed, and a lot of that is going to be dependent on states providing infrastructure deployment plans that are due August 1st. So as I think about this conference, there's actually probably not a more important conference in the history of electric vehicles. It's extraordinary to think about. Probably not a conference more important in the history of electric vehicles than the one that you're sitting at now, just because of the moment in time that we're in. We all have a stake in making sure that we get this right, that we build out a charging infrastructure network that is not only safe, convenient, reliable, but also equitable. And so we're hoping to do that with Michael's leadership, with Alex's leadership, and with all of your all's input.
Great. All right. Thanks to all three of you for getting us going. Alex, I'm going to start with you. So Secretary Granholm, and now just a sec ago, Andrew mentioned that just a month from this coming Saturday, these plans are due. Then, Alex, they're going to metaphorically land on your desk. And I think a question a lot of us have is about the NEVI program is how do you envision stitching together these 52 plans for the 50 states and 2 territories? How do you envision stitching them together into one cohesive national network that connects us all?
That's a great question. So certainly an exciting time, right? A month of anticipation. I think I will say that's a feature, not a bug. And actually going back, the NEVI program really has its origins in the DOT Alternative Fuel Corridor designations, where I first met and started working with Andrew. So the states have been actively working together to build this foundation for over 5 years now, right? There have also been investments through the VW settlement to build out the infrastructure. So I think our job is to scale, and I think that federal-state partnership is going to be absolutely necessary in order to make this successful and in order to really place the stewardship at the state level, right? I think the state vision for how the charging network needs to look like in their state kind of rolled up in the broader federal ecosystem is that key conversation and partnership that needs to happen in order for this to work and for it to last. I will say at the Joint Office, shortly after the NEVI guidance was rolled out in February, we signed an MOU with NASIO and AASHTO. So our counterparts in the state really recognizing the need to solidify that partnership, enable that state-to-state dialogue as well as the regional dialogue, right? And so I think this is going to play out on several different levels. I think the last thing that I will say in terms of the national network, certainly that guidance was really critical in establishing the vision. This should focus on interstates. We're looking for 450 kilowatt fast chargers every 50 miles. You know, that is, I think, really what we see as our role, is to kind of set the vision and help the states work with us to say how this is going to work for them and what this actually looks like. The rulemaking that was just released in June is key, and that's a very much a stated intent of that rule. How do we make sure that we've got a consistent experience as you're getting in your car, let's say in Oregon, and potentially driving across the country? And then I think we're going to learn a lot with the state plan review, and we've been actively engaging with the states on a daily basis, and I think really excited to see what they have been working on, and to kind of dig in on August 1st and really transition this partnership from planning and thinking about it to implementation.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm personally excited about going from thinking and talking to more doing, so we don't have to wait too much longer. So, Andrew, when we spoke before the panel, you brought up the idea of a systems of systems approach to build out the 21st century transportation network. And so I'd like to kind of work with you to develop that theme and ask you, as you work with DOE and the Joint Office to develop the guidance documents, the strategies, how is DOE bringing this framing to bear on the question of how we integrate charging into the larger transportation network?
So we've got a lot of important issues to resolve with the $7.5 billion that we're responsible for deploying. The $5 billion that's going to be given to states. We have a $2.5 billion discretionary program at the Department of Transportation that we're going to work in coordination with the Department of Energy and the Joint Office to ensure that there's charging infrastructure in urban cores and rural areas and places that might not get picked up by state departments of transportation. We have a FACA that we're standing up. We have alternative fuel corridor designations that are going to be released. We have a whole bunch of work on this $7.5 billion pot. But Nancy, to your point, that is such a small sliver of what it is that we're working on at the Department of Transportation. In terms of a system of systems approach, I think, it's incredibly important that we think holistically about our entire transportation network so that the first time we do it right. And that means that the highway charging to the greatest extent possible connects to our port infrastructure, connects to our transit systems, connects to our airports, our roads, our waterways. And the good news is we have a lot of funds available to make sure that there's that interconnected linkage that's necessary to connect everything. So as Alex mentioned, we have now over $5 billion to build out transit electrification. We have over $2 billion to build out electrification, so-called inside the gate at port complexes. We have a new airport zero-emission vehicle infrastructure program. So while the $7.5 billion gets a lot of sort of above-the-fold coverage, as it should, we need to make sure that everything is working together, is interoperable to the greatest extent possible, and that's something that we're going to endeavor to accomplish.
Thanks, Andrew. Michael, I'd like to turn to you and return to the theme of convergence that I brought up in my opening remarks. So DOE has a large number of programs that address electric sector technologies that are both critical to making sure that electrifying transportation is successful and are also important for improving the reliability and resilience of electrical service. So one of the goals that we have when we talk about vehicle integration is ensuring that transportation electrification yields both environmental and economic benefits, not just to the people who buy and drive electric vehicles, but also to the general body of the utilities customers. So, Michael, I'd love it if you could expand on what DOE is doing in crucial areas like clean generation, which you touched on, as well as smart grid, distributed energy resource integration, and some of the other technologies that are really going to be central to successfully integrating EVs onto the grid.
This is critically important. So for those of you that have worked with the Department of Energy, you know that for many years now, we have been working a lot on vehicle electrification, on batteries, on getting to the point where there can actually be a market pull for these vehicles across both light duty and heavy duty. So I guess let me give you kind of my view of the trajectory of how that's going to go and then what that means for this priority on vehicle and grid integration. Clearly now, 6% of sales are trending towards EVs. I worked for a long time in the automotive industry. There's no automaker that isn't all in now in electric vehicles. So we are going to see this growth in the number of models. We're going to see consumers more and more exposed to these, the vehicles, and they're going to say, this works, I like it. I think the charging is going to show up just in time. If we were just any later, we'd maybe really be too late and kind of stymieing that growth. But I think with the, as Alex said, 52 plans across country, we will have enough chargers to literally cover all long distance trips, which will be very inspiring for consumers. And then we got to fill in a lot with the community-based charging. So as we do that, though, two things are going to happen, I believe, as we look forward then to 2024, 2025. First, as this growth comes, we're going to see some tightening in the supply chain. There just is realistically not quite enough critical minerals as that's growing, but there's a lot of work going now to expand it, but it takes 4 or 5 years. So I think we're going to see a little bit of tightening there, and so we're working very aggressively to try to do everything we can to develop that supply chain and processing materials now so that in 2025, 2026, we have the materials we need. The second thing is the utilities and vehicle and grid integration. So we touched on earlier that we have to achieve our overall economy-wide decarbonization, we have to get to close to 100% clean grid. Transportation is going to be by far the largest new load on the grid. It will also be the most manageable load we've had, and it'll be really game-changing. So we know we can make enough electricity to satisfy all the electric vehicles, but can we make enough while we're moving to renewables and do it really cost-effectively to achieve that promise of low cost of operation? So the idea of vehicle grid integration, of having this move towards a 100% clean grid, high level of renewables, and at the same time, having a move towards transportation electrification simultaneously, we believe if we work those together, the vehicles can become a service to the grid. So one of the key things we talk about is EVs at scale. So what happens when we have EVs at large scale? Millions and millions in individual service territories of utilities. So tomorrow morning, 7:30, I think it was mentioned before, we're hosting a discussion workshop, I don't know, somewhere in that vein, specifically on this question. We think that there's a lot of opportunity for government to work with public utility commissions, to work with utilities of all types, to help bring the technical assistance and knowledge needed to help make the changes we need on those systems to help support vehicle electrification. There's technology pieces that we think have to be developed as well. There needs to be the ability for the vehicle to charger communication and charger to grid communication to enable this large scale of EV. So this is one of the things that's so important with the draft standards that were proposed, the standardization of those communication protocols and kind of moving to the state of the art. We think that will be a big game changer and enabler there as well.
Fantastic. Michael, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball and just ask you to elaborate on the standards, because I agree with you that this is critical for scaling. And I think there's a number of areas where there's been discussion about standards, not just in how chargers communicate with vehicles and communicate with the grid, but also for using, for example, vehicle telematics for metering and managing load, and also for interconnecting vehicles with bidirectional charging capabilities. So who do you think really owns that responsibility, and how do we move the ball down the field there?
Right now, as many of you know, the vehicle charging industry, and for those of you that are here and involved and have been for 10 years, I applaud you. It's still a nascent industry. It's small. And think about 10 years ago, the people working on charging, a number of you in the room, like how few they were. And as we're growing, though, bigger, there is, I do believe, a role for government, Nancy, to help coalesce, if you will. I think as we've talked with people across the industry, so many have said, look, some of the answers are obvious. We just need someone to say it. We need someone to just start and basically point the direction. Where are we all going? May not be perfect. If you ask 10 people, they might have 10 slightly different variations on it. But what I think I'm hearing most is the time is now to set just a clear direction and path, be flexible, be open standards, but recognize that we are targeting nothing short of transforming the entire transportation system. It'll affect every single person, every single business, right? And this is a massive change. So there's a lot of responsibility there. I don't think government owns it alone. We obviously did a big step with the proposed standards that were put out by Federal Highways Administration. We're looking forward to everyone's comments on that. We want to make those robust and solid, but we need to move forward, right? We need to have some clear direction. We need to start coalescing. I will say from DOE's part, one of the things that we will continue to do is bring players together from industry, from NGOs, utilities, to help beyond just the current set of standards. What's next? How do we modernize? What's the next piece that's needed? What's the next level of standards, of protocols, what are the gaps in there? So we'd welcome any input on those things as well, beyond just the short term, which will be really important, but then, what's the next thing? Medium and heavy duty, we should talk about at some point as well, trucks.
Andrew, would you like to talk about trucks and standards? That's a curveball too, so you don't have to.
Yeah. So I'll be careful here because we have an open rule. And just to take a step back, for folks that aren't aware, on June 9th, to Michael's point, the Federal Highway Administration released a notice of proposed rulemaking to establish minimum standards and requirements for charging infrastructure, not only under the NEVI program, but under Title 23 programs more broadly. So any project that uses Title 23 funds, which includes highway and transit projects, Federal Highway Administration proposed a notice of proposed rulemaking. That was required by the bipartisan infrastructure law. So we're going to look forward to take comments and to issue a final rule. That's not outcome determinative, by the way, on the approvals for the state infrastructure deployment plans that states are releasing, but that will be a helpful additional tool to supplement those plans. And those plans aren't exclusive of light-duty vehicles. I want to make that clear as well. We're looking, per the last question, for a system of systems approach. So we want to see how you're integrating light-duty vehicles, yes, but also medium and heavy-duty vehicles as well. On the medium and heavy-duty vehicle question, as we talked about, we're just talking about a specific tranche of funding right now, $5 billion for the so-called NEVI program. We have $2.5 billion that's coming out later in the form of discretionary grants where medium and heavy-duty vehicles wouldn't be precluded from applying for those funds. And then additionally, there are even more programs coming out from the Department of Transportation for medium and heavy-duty vehicle applications. In particular, there's a reducing truck emissions at port facilities program that the Federal Highway Administration will be releasing a notice of funding opportunity for that would provide funding for port electrification, shoreside power, anti-idling technology, and so forth. I know Michael and the team at DOE are working assiduously on the research and technology to further medium and heavy duty applications. So we're looking across the board at all segments because we know that we need to provide a response for all those classes.
Great. Thanks so much for your answer on that. And yes, I do think that one of the really important things about having a more muscular federal government role in supporting transportation electrification is this opportunity to bring the nationwide vision and to develop standards and frankly to work with entities, global entities, to as we are, transportation is in fact a global industry. So I want to go back to something that Michael touched on, which is that it's not just you all that are being asked to do new things in new ways, but state departments of transportation, state energy offices, public service commissions around the states, all of them are also experiencing the challenges of this convergence of the electric power and transportation industries. And, certainly now and doing their homework and getting their plans together for Alex, but I think also there will be significant challenges and requirements for them to collaborate as we move into the implementation phase. So I'll start maybe with Andrew and work my way, but I'd really be interested in hearing you all talk a little bit about what are your agencies doing, what's the Joint Office doing to help the states make the most of this opportunity. How are you helping them develop new lines of communication, build new capabilities? and and work together to really realize the vision coming from Washington on the ground in each of the 52 states and territories. So, Andrew, you want to lead off on that?
Sure, I'll provide a brief opener, and then I should turn it over to Alex to talk about his efforts. But the purpose, the reason why we created a joint office was to provide technical assistance and resources to states and localities to build out a strategic national network of charging infrastructure. That's exactly what the joint office and what Alex and his team are working on every day. I think Secretary Granholm touched upon the fact that there has been reach out now to all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia. That's a direct consequence of the joint office, providing that leadership and technical assistance. So we think that that's where those efforts start, and where those efforts are going to continue is in the joint office. Just to be clear, the Department of Transportation has the ultimate responsibility and law of approving those plans. The joint office will be the think tank to provide, the best recommendations, the best analysis, the best resources, the best education to states, localities, and stakeholders. But ultimately, we're going to have some very good advice and counsel from the joint office to provide approvals for states to begin implementing a national charging network. But let me turn it over to Alex to talk about the particulars.
I think that was a great setup. I mean, that is really the intention of the joint office. And you referenced kind of the tent that we're building, and we can't make it big enough. There's really a number of stakeholders that need to be working together to make this successful. I think one of the exciting things, I've been working on energy issues and energy policy most of my career, everyone wants to see this happen, right? So everyone is going into that tent wanting to see this be successful. And I think it's really our job to help facilitate some of those conversations. We don't have all the answers, right? It's sometimes to just make those connections and, quite frankly, just grow our capacity as a nation to deliver on this and to be truly a global leader in electrification of transportation. So that's working with state DOTs. We're actively kind of helping them connect with utilities to understand really detailed issues. There are 7,000 rate structures in the United States, right? So that's pretty daunting when you talk about a national network. Even just connecting the state DOTs with their utilities to really understand implications of things like demand charges. So I think that's certainly part of it. This public-private partnership is really part of the entire NEVI program. It is written into the legislation. So this is certainly going to be, I think an amplification of that. And I think one of the things that I am really excited about this program, it's a 5-year program. And we're going to learn as we go, and we're going to be smarter in year 5 than we are in year 1. And it's going to be that learning culture that we're creating in partnership with the states, in partnership with the private sector, that I think we can collectively utilize to, again, really establish the U.S. as a global leader here.
I just want to bring in one added dimension beyond the state level, is the sub-state. So the local cities, MPOs, communities. This is going to be critically important. There's 1.25 billion of that, 7.5 billion. I mean, these are huge numbers for community-based charging. Over $1 billion. Just imagine like 2-3 years ago, if we said, yeah, God, could we have $1 billion for community charging? We would all been like, man, that's crazy talk, right? But that is what we're going to do. And that is going to take a lot of work. That's going to be below the state level in many cases, at the local and community level. And cities and communities, this isn't what they do day to day, right? I mean, this is new territory for them. They're going to need people like the groups that are in this room today to be working with them, to help guide them, to help give them the benefit input. How do we do that equitably? How do we get it responsibly? How do we deal with the charging for those people that don't have charging at home? And, quite honestly, it's not a great answer to send them to, 57 cents a kilowatt hour fast charging, right? How do you get lower price charging for those people? Do you do street side charging? Do you do central pods in cities or in neighborhoods? So there's a lot of open questions there that we still need to work together to figure out. But I'd encourage everyone here, really be thinking about that. How do you work at that level to help those communities out? Because that will dictate a lot of our success or not, I think, in this funding.
Great, Michael. Yeah, and your response to my earlier question anticipated my next question, which was I did want to turn to the discussion of gaps. And I think you're absolutely right that the regional grants, or the community grants rather, are the means to fill those gaps, or to seed the private sector investments that'll fill those gaps. So you talked a little bit about your vision of that. I want to turn it back to Andrew and then Alex to offer their perspective on how that program and others that are in your purview can be leveraged to fill some of the gaps that you think are the most important, and in particular to fulfill the equity commitments that the administration has made.
And let me just circle back to a point that Michael made that deserves underscoring. When we say that it's important to talk to localities, to talk to states, to talk to other stakeholders, we don't mean next week or next month. We mean right now. So don't wait for, I was on a great bike trip yesterday with the city of Portland, and we just happened to be talking about, some of the discretionary grant opportunities. Don't wait until that notice of funding comes out, and we're anticipating, by the way, that notice of funding opportunity will come out before the end of the year. Begin those discussions today. It is critically important. There is no need to wait for us. A lot of the guidance will be delineated in statute. That discretionary grant program is pretty explicit as to the considerations and priorities that we're required to look at. So begin those conversations if you haven't. Begin those conversations today. That's point one. Point two, in addition to the discretionary grant program that Michael mentioned, it's a critically important $2.5 billion slug. As he mentioned, $1.25 billion is specifically for community charging. There's other buckets of funding within the bipartisan infrastructure law as well. Within the NEVI program, just taking a step back, 10% of those funds, the secretary has discretion to gap fill. So we're going to look at those state infrastructure deployment plans at the end of the day. We're going to approve the plans that, in coordination with the joint office, and then we'll look strategically at Oklahoma and Texas and California and Massachusetts, up and down the country, to determine where we need to cite additional charging infrastructure to solve for some of our equity needs, to solve for the consistent experience that Alex mentioned, and to ensure a reliable network in those states and across the country. Point three, in addition to all of the additional resources that were provided in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and there's a vast amount of additional resources, the good news is, in addition to all of those resources, there are even more. Within the legacy programs at the Department of Transportation, there is also eligibility within the CMAQ program, within the National Highway Performance Program, within the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. So the question at this point is not whether there is a sufficient amount of funding to site charging infrastructure. Obviously, we could always use more, but it's going to take, I think, all of you to work with states, to work with localities, to work with tribes, to work with all of the requisite partners to make sure that they're availed of all of the opportunities in the bipartisan infrastructure law so that they can leverage these funds, not only at DOT, but at DOE, at EPA, and across the whole of the federal government.
Great. Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to the system questions, corridor and community charging aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, right? And so that state-local nexus and having that conversation to make sure we have a system that works is really key. I'll maybe just add two quick things. I think Andrew mentioned equity. Community engagement is going to be huge, right? Really engaging the communities. States are actively working on that now as they develop their plans. It's going to be key for cities and localities as well to understand how this tremendous opportunity can benefit that community. And I think along those lines, workforce development is another huge opportunity, really making sure that we are providing the skills and the training to, again, establish the U.S. as a global leader here. That's something that's going to be certainly something the Joint Office is going to be working to help support, as these should be good U.S. jobs, and this should be an opportunity for localities. It's not just the charging stations themselves, it's the ecosystem that's going to be needed to support that, and really realizing that is a tremendous opportunity.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up. And actually, I'll give Michael and Andrew, who were both nodding their heads vigorously as you were saying that. Would you like to add anything to that about programs that your departments have underway or envision putting in place to kind of fulfill what Alex was just talking about?
I'll add one thing. So many of you here, have probably worked with DOE's Vehicle Technologies Office and our Clean Cities and Technology Integration Program. We have a number of people here, both that help run and lead that program, as well as the Clean City Coalitions. We put out a notice of intent about a month and a half ago of our funding opportunity, which usually means that the funding opportunity is going to come out about a month and a half, 2 months later, which is right about now, with a number of really critical things in this space. Charging for people out of home, how to address vehicle grid integration, a range of these issues. So I'd encourage you, please take a look at that notice of intent. And to Andrew's point, we put these notices out early so people could start early. Don't have to wait for the actual funding opportunity. It telegraphs, a high likelihood of what's coming. So please take a look at that. And those programs they rely on people like all of you in this room to make them happen. Come up with the creative and innovative ideas. We have an open topic that we often put into there, and it's open because, while we might have 5 or 6 that really we're interested in 5 or 6 topics, we also have an open one. Is there something we're missing? Some really innovative, creative idea that will help move things forward? And so please apply to that.
The only thing I would add, and it's embarrassing that I know this by heart, but if you go to page 9 of the Federal Highway Administration's guidance on the NEVI program, there's actually a really useful chart that delineates exactly what eligibilities are availed in the bipartisan infrastructure law for purposes of EV charging infrastructure. That includes, to Alex's point, workforce development, but it also includes financing tools like TIFIA. It includes grant programs, like the discretionary pots that Michael was referring to, the formula programs, up and down the line. We're trying to make this as user-friendly, as user-centric as possible, and hopefully that's a helpful resource as well.
One other one I forgot to mention, several people here from our loan program office, Wayne Killian, Chelsea Sexton, a lot of you know, the loan program office is a huge opportunity also for both new businesses and established businesses to grow and provide financing. And that's, there's literally billions that they have, I believe, that they are working diligently to get out. So if you haven't talked to them and that's relevant for you, please do.
Great. So, one of the things that's really come out in the course of this panel is just how many other pots of money there are at these agencies, some of them contributed by the infrastructure bill and others that were already there. So that's great news. The other thing that is recognized in the bill and was a theme that we really emphasized in the National EV Charging Summit back in January is how important it is to make this infusion of federal funds the means to lever up 10x or more in capital, in funds from the capital markets, private sector investment. And so I'd like to turn it back to all three of you and give you a chance to talk about how you see the structure and implementation of these programs, focusing specifically, or how they'll address this challenge of getting the private sector investment that's really going to give us the scale that we need to reach. Andrew, you want to start?
Sure. Ultimately, we're going to need a bigger boat at the Department of Transportation, and that's something that I talk to a lot of constituencies about. I think we're going to be housing the equivalent of an additional executive agency at DOT over the course of the next 5 years. Our estimates are that we're going to need anywhere from 1,200 to 1,800 new people just within the next 4.5 years to be able to implement and execute fully on the bipartisan infrastructure law. But while we are going to have new business lines at the Department of Transportation, my strong sense is that a lot of state departments of transportation will not want to have new business lines. And so that's where the private sector comes into play. It's going to be absolutely critical that this is oriented to help support the build out for the private sector, because a lot of state DOTs aren't going to want to take this funding on. Within the NEVI program, it's a may So states at their discretion may cite charging infrastructure without executing procurements with the private sector. As with respect to the discretionary grants, it's a must. So you have to have a public-private partnership with the private sector. But by and large, we would envision that the vast majority of the charging infrastructure build-out will occur with the private sector's involvement. And we want to do everything possible to support and to supplement, but not to supplant, private sector investment. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that the private sector is on board, that utilities are on board, that stakeholders are on board, that we have a big tent that is indicative of what's necessary to build out charging infrastructure in this country.
Yeah, I love how you said that, supplement but not supplant. That really is the challenge. And Alex, let me give you a chance to weigh in here.
Yeah, and I think Secretary Granholm actually said our job is to just slightly lead the market, right? And so I think certainly, and you know, calling on something Michael said earlier, it's to make the investment to build the confidence in this network through the investment in the national highway system. But to get to that 50% sales goal by 2030, we're going to need more, right? I think we're going to have to go farther. We're going to need additional investment, and so it's going to be really key to see that continue. And we have seen some incredible investments by the private sector, right? New manufacturing facilities. You know, I think the speakers that introduced this panel just making incredible investments in developing that capacity to deliver this network. We're seeing investments by the auto companies, by the utilities. We've got to see that continue, and we've got to see that grow, and we've really got to see it scale. And collectively, that is what's going to be needed to meet that 50% sales goal. And then to move into medium and heavy duty, right? To take that next step.
You know, I will say one of the wonderful things about this job and the last year in particular is the ability to sit and talk with companies from huge car companies down to smaller groups that run a small number of fueling stations, shipping industry, railroad industry, automotive industry, medium heavy trucks. It is absolutely consistent across the board. People have turned the switch in a lot of ways, and it's not should I do this, will I do it? It's how will I do it, when, how do I get there? And part of our strategy is we laid out a goal of nothing short of decarbonize all of transportation. We said to do that, we are going to need to pursue strategies that have the marketplace and the wins and the strength of the marketplace behind us. We can't dictate our way to 100% decarbonization. If you wanted to maybe get 10, 20%, we could use just policy and regulations. So we need to leverage the private sector. We need to leverage the trillions and trillions that are invested every year in infrastructure and in buildings and business and guide it to these new clean energy economies. I am, absolutely confident that people's mind is there, their head's there, they realize it. So now it's, I think, a matter of people like in this room who know the space to help guide that, help provide the insight to those private sector. Where's the opportunity that makes sense, when, how to do that, connect them with the public sector as well. But really a lot of the actual end of the day work and spending is going to happen through private sector.
Yeah, that's so true. And as you say, it is happening. I mean, I feel like every day practically when I look at my news feed, there's a story about a company that I, remember when it was a startup with just a few people, and now they're going public, or a big announcement about construction plans to construct a new manufacturing plant to build EVs or invest in repurposing an existing plant, and this is happening all over the country. And I'll add that I think one of the few positive things, well, maybe I shouldn't say few, but one of the positive things to come out of the COVID epidemic is really a new awareness about the importance of supply chain insurance. And I think we're seeing, repatriation of parts of the supply chain, batteries, microprocessors, and those kind of facilities being built on American soil as well. So I think that's super exciting, and I think we have the chance to really seize and hold the leadership in advanced manufacturing and advancing these technologies. And the programs at your agencies have been instrumental in the R&D and the support to get these industries to that point. So I want to give you each a kind of a minute or so to make some closing remarks. And a point that I think all of you have made is that though you are the dynamic trio or the three musketeers of electrification, the federal government cannot just, cannot do this on its own. It takes the states, it takes local government. Some of you represent those entities. We have community-based organizations and a host of other types of groups that Forth brings together in this convening. So I want to give you each a chance to just, riff on something you've already said or add in something you forgot to say but want this group to hear about. What can these people do, over the next 2 days and over the next 5 years to help you all fulfill the vision that you've laid out today? So, Michael, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, and thanks so much, Nancy, for hosting this panel and sharing it so well. Two things I would say. One, I'm going to pick up on Andrew's on the jobs front, and I'll be very, very specific here. At DOE, in our vehicles program, our Vehicle Technologies Office, if you go to Vehicle Technologies Office and look for job postings, we just put out there 17 positions that we are looking to fill because, just as Andrew said, the growth in there in these areas. So if you are interested, those are from engineers to stakeholder groups up through actually the director of the office as well. So please help us find people that are interested in that type of job, interested in serving government. Government is service. That's why they call it that. But it is a great opportunity to make a difference right now. So that would be, I think, one of the key things. The other one is just over the next few days, talk about innovative ideas. Like, what are the big challenges? What are innovative approaches? And then, as Andrew said, start making it happen. Figure out, hey, how do I talk to people now, help people now, state, local. We're not facing a shortage of funding right now. Now what we need is the ideas to execute really good things to move the needle forward. So don't wait. Take your ideas and change them into action.
So I'll maybe close this out. The vision of the Joint Office is a future where everyone can ride and drive electric, right? So it is a holistic solution. I think maybe calling on something Andrew said earlier, this is a pivotal moment, right? If this is the moment for electrification and EV charging, it makes this conference just critically important. We're a month away from getting these state plans. I think really excited to kind of see what the states have been working on. But that feedback loop is just huge and really is the kind of the theory behind the Joint Office. We need to have this conversation, certainly internally with the federal government, with all of you. The Federal Highways Administration issued an RFI in December to really kind of help inform this program. There is a notice of proposed rulemaking out. There is the EV working group that is selecting members. We need to hear from all of you and really make sure that conversation is happening and creating that feedback loop. So I'd encourage you, please feel free to pull any of us aside. We've got a number of folks from the Joint Office team, Steve Lomley, Matt Pignot, Monisha Shah. We want to hear from you, right? I think this is the opportunity, and this is really one of the great things of being able to do this in person is we can catch each other in the hallway and have these conversations and create these feedback loops that again, really kind of help aggregate towards that broader objective that we're all working towards. There's
so much work ahead of us, clearly, over the days, weeks, and months to come. But I think it's worth just a moment to thank you for getting us to where we are now. We would not be in the moment that we're in if it was not for everyone out in this crowd. That's one reason why I'm personally here, is just to commend the team that's here, to thank everyone sincerely, deeply. These are conversations that began in earnest in 2016, 2017. A lot of work went into getting us where we are today. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. We're gonna have some great conversations over the course of the next couple of days, but my heartfelt thanks to everyone to getting us to this pivotal inflection point in our nation's history. We're going to get this done.
Well, Andrew, that's a great note to end on. I don't think I can improve upon it. So instead, I want to thank the three of you for being here and sharing your thoughts and vision. Thank all of you for being here. And again, Jeff and his great team at Forth for convening us. So please put your hands together and thank our panel.